Hi, welcome everyone. Our next speaker is Beatrice Rivoira. You'll have to apologise for the pronunciation of your surname, Beatrice. Beatrice is an Italian vocational diver with a master's degree in marine biology and oceanography. She works around the world as a CCR and OC instructor and participates in diving projects. Delving into HF has been a natural consequence. Her topic is message not delivered when communication fails us. Surface and underwater communications play a crucial role in diving activity. What happens when they fail and why does it happen? Beatrice, over to you.
Thank you so much, Angie. Thank you for the introduction. And I hope you're all seeing me and hearing me well. And welcome to this second day of the Human Factors in Diving Conference. I know that for some of you, this is probably the second talk of the day, but for some others, maybe watching the recordings, this may even be the fifth talk of the day. So I'll do my very best to be sure that it's still entertaining and interesting and as easy as possible to follow for every one of you. And should you have any doubt, please be sure to just let us know and just ask questions if you need to. As you probably know, English is not my first language, so should any misunderstanding happen, again, just let us know. And right now, I think we want to dive straight into our topic, which, as Angie introduced, is about communication. And especially, I've said when communication fails us. But to be honest, we should actually say when we fail at communicating. And I don't know if it's honestly because I'm Italian, so we like to speak a lot, we use our hands a lot, we are just chatty people, to be honest. But I found out during my work that communication is actually a really, really interesting topic and a topic where I knew really just not enough. And I discovered this just starting my path with Garrett on the human factors field. And a few years ago, I did this first workshop at a skill camp that was about communication because we need some topic that was available for all divers at all levels. And we know that while diving, we need to communicate. So it's something that was really adapted for each level of experience. And it was amazing how in just a couple of hours, everyone that was attending this workshop just realized that we were missing a lot. They were learning from me and I was learning a lot from the others. And what I started to get more interested in the topic. And in the end, I realized that, again, it was much more complex than what I was thinking. And realized that actually, as Ken Liu said, every act of communication is a miracle of translation. And I'm pretty sure that by the end of this talk, most of you will agree with me. If not, we can talk about it and see what your different ideas are. But the point is that communicating is something that we always often give for granted and we often underestimate. We just think that it's happening because it's something that we are used to do since we were little kids. And maybe we were not using proper words, but we were shouting and yelling and crying, whimpering, laughing, and using our hands and body to communicate. Because as humans, we are social creatures. We need to interact with the other people, and communication is fundamental in this situation. And just a few days ago, I've seen this video from when I was a little kid. I was like 2 or 3 years old, and my brother was around 6 or 7. And we were in the garden, there were some birds flying, and I just pointed at the birds and say, "Coco," which is not the Italian word for bird, but it's the sound that the chicken makes. So it was just my way of communicating that that one was a bird. And my brother, who was older than me, intervenes and said, "Just do not say bird, you need to say uccello," which is the Italian term. And he tried to teach me how to say uccello. And I was trying, and he told me, just say u. And I was going, u. Say ch. And I was going ch. And I say uccello. And I did. And as soon as I did it, another bird passed by, and I went, "Oh, Coco." Because it didn't resonate with me, the fact that that word was associated to that animal, but I perfectly knew what I wanted to say, and I just found another way to point that, to say that. And actually, this is what's happening every day, and what's happening in diving as well. We knew exactly what we want to say, and we try to communicate it in the best way possible, but we do not always succeed. So, for example, during my work, I had to do a lot of different jobs. Like, I'm a marine biologist, but I'm also a CCR technical diving instructors, and I do educational talks, translate articles, books, all these sort of things, where I need to interact with a wide variety of audience. So every time I need to adapt my way of speaking, of communicating what I want to say with them. And sometimes it works, sometimes it works a little bit less. And as long as I keep going, I keep learning how to communicate better. Because we all know that if I don't understand during a recreational dive what kind of fish, what species of fish that is, it's not a huge problem. But if I'm doing an underwater maintenance work or a survey work, and I do not know, I do not understand what you're telling me to do, that may lead to much more severe consequences. So we need to work to make sure that our message is going through in a correct way. And again, we do think that we are all good communicators. When we say something, we just basically give for granted that the other person is understanding. So we think that communication is simple. And I did think too at the very beginning. And then I started realizing that I was really, really wrong. Because what we are talking about is not only communication, but it's effective communication. And this is where the difference has huge consequences on our activity and how our message is getting through. And what do we mean with effective communication? Actually, we may have different definitions of this topic. So one of them is effective communication is the process of sending a message in such a way that the message received is as close in meaning as possible to the message intended. And it's not always that easy. I think we all have those parents that can hear really well, and you say one thing and they reply to a totally different questions because they think they got it right, but they didn't because they were not able to hear the question correctly. And this could happen, it actually happens every day. And sometimes it has no consequence, but sometimes it may. So, for example, another way of looking at this topic is using this other definition for effective communication, which is a communication between two or more persons in which the intended message is A, properly encoded. So I want to be sure that I know the words, I know the correct term to express what I want to say in this case. B, delivered through appropriate channel. If we think about voice is not always the best channel to communicate. If we think about a diving center, maybe we're in the compressor room, the compressor is going on, and there is a lot of noise in the background. And someone is coming to you and just telling you what kind of mixture they want in their tank. You may get the numbers wrong because of the noise. So at that point, maybe it's just better to write it down and give you a piece of paper. This way, the message will be clear and there will be no space for misunderstanding. Or, for example, when we are on a boat and we got the noise from the engine going on and the wind and the people chattering and the waves and everything else that is around us. And the dive master just start to do his briefing for the dive. And maybe the one on the back of the boat cannot hear it really, really well. So we need to make sure that we are using the appropriate way to communicate with the others. And and here we're touching a little bit in what I was saying now on the boat, the message needs to be received. If during a briefing we we always know those situations where the dive master is giving the briefing and someone is just, looking at their equipment, setting up their computer, or just chatting with the other buddy. And at that point, are we really sure that they heard what we were saying? I don't think so. And so at that point, the communication becomes useless because the message is not getting through. And we all know that kind of people, the kind of divers on the boat, there are always at least one. And then the message needs to be properly decoded and understood by the recipient. In this case, I may send the correct message, but if you're not receiving it correctly or you're not understanding it correctly, again, the communication is not working. Even in this case, me giving this presentation to you means that for most of you, we are probably getting through 3 different languages, because I'm Italian, but I'm speaking in English, and some of you may not have English as a native language as well. So this means that we are getting through three different languages, and the message needs to overcome, therefore, a lot of barriers already. And if again we are talking about effective communication, about diving, in this case we could tell and talk about a lot of different stories. We all get some. Really easy example would be like a boat where you got people with the twin set or the CCR rebreathers, and the boat doesn't have much space to move on, so they just jump in the water and ask the people on the boat to give them their tank. And it has always happened many times. Someone in the boat just talking to the dive master saying, for example, Chris, could you just give me the tank? And the guy is turning around and seeing 10 different tanks. So it's like, okay, which one is yours? And from the water, you're just shouting some details like it's a white tank, and there are 3 different white tanks. Or maybe the one with the label, there's my name on the label, and then it gets easier. The point is that the diver in the water knew exactly which tank was his or hers, but the other ones couldn't. And we just gave for granted that the people on the boat could just imagine and immediately understand which tank was yours. And this is not always happening. And what I want to tell you actually is a much more personal example. I have to admit that I was the one who did the mistake in this situation, who triggered the situation, but I had a couple of partnering crimes in this case, because I do believe that they helped me setting up the situation for which this all happened. And so we're going a few years back in time. And I want you to imagine this situation. We are a group of divers doing an hypoxic CCR trip. And during this trip, there was another instructor with an hypoxic CCR student. They had already completed all the dives that they needed to do for the class at the lake. And they were just missing a couple of dives and the famous bailout ascent. So we were all well aware that this guy had to do this bailout ascent during the week. We just didn't know when at that point. And so the whole week went really well. And sometimes in the middle, my buddy decided not to dive for the day. So I decided to tag along to the instructor and this other diver, because we knew each other. We had already been diving together a lot. That was not an issue. And the whole dive was uneventful. It was amazing. The water was clear, the wreck were stunning, everything was perfect. And we then moved to our to the shot line to do our ascent with our decompression stops. And at that point, we find ourselves being me, this guy, the student, and the other instructor right above us. But before moving on, I need to take a little step back and tell you what happened to me the week before the trip. Because the weekend just before the trip, I was diving with a person that no matter what, insisted on signaling he's moving to the next deco stop with this signal. And I'm pretty sure that most of you now already got where I'm going with this story. So he was on open circuit and doing this signal instead of this one. At the last dive of the weekend, no matter how I insisted with him on changing this sign, he just kept using that. So at the last dive, I just did the same and said, okay, we're moving to the last stop. And I just say, what harm can this do if I just do it once? And of course, I was so wrong. Because what happened was that back to the hypoxic dive, we were doing our deco ascent. And at some point, the guy asked me if we were going to move to the next one. And I still don't know why my brain tricked me that way, but I didn't even realize that. And instead of doing yes, move to the second stop, I just did yes, let's move to the next one. I've never done that sign in the other days during the week, just that moment. And I didn't even register that. So I didn't realize I did it. And so the guy gave me the okay, we moved to the next stop, and at the next stop, he calmly went on bailout. So he switched from the closed circuit to the open circuit. And I asked him if everything was okay. He said, yes, perfectly fine. The instructor saw that and immediately came down to check if everything was okay. And the guy replied, yes. So we just went on with our decompression ascent and everything was fine. Of course, they had to do a longer decompression ascent because of the open circuit in this point. And what happened was that basically I thought that he had switched on bailout because he already had some issues on the unit during the week, but he was always able to fix them. So he's a very skilled diver, had no doubts that everything was in control. And the other instructor thought the same. And at the same time, he also thought that maybe they had decided to do the skills during this ascent. So for me, it was all fine. For the student, everything was fine at this point. Because when we started our debriefing and the instructor asked him, why did you went on bailout? He simply replied, because she told me so. And at that point, my brain went, boom. I realized I had actually made that sign. So the student thought that because I'm instructor on that unit 2, I was asking him to do the skill. I thought that he had agreed on doing the skill in that case, and this other instructor thought that he had a problem on the unit. So all of us, each one of us, had a really good reason to think that everything was happening for some reasons. But actually, it was a really, at this point, non-effective communication, was a bad communication. And if we think about what I've said just before this story, what happened was that in the first step that I've cited, A, the message in this case was not properly encoded, and that was my mistake. B, it was delivered through an appropriate channel. Yes, we're using our hands underwater. We were not shouting in the loop because we all know the loop may work for really short messages, but not for a whole sentence. Unless someone is cursing, in that case, you're understanding everything perfectly. The message was received. Yes, it was actually received. He signaled me that he had received my message. And he properly decoded and understood the message because the message I've sent was different from what I was thinking. And he decoded it perfectly. The mistake was on my side. I have to say, I never done that mistake again. And I had to pay quite a few beers at the end of the day because that also cost him to refill the bailouts for the whole week. But luckily, everything went fine. He did his skills in the end, and the whole week went on again uneventful and was a really, really pleasant dive. But it was really a specific case of total miscommunication or not effective communication in this case. Because the reality is that communicating is not as simple as just talking. Talking is one thing, communicating is another. And apart from the act of doing this, we also got enablers and barriers. And in this case, let's start with some of the barriers that I personally found out during time, but that most of people recognize are some of obstacles in our way of dealing with interacting with other people. So we could have physical barriers, and the physical barriers, just like we are saying about diving, could be the way we need to communicate. So we may use our hands. So the message that we could send must be much shorter, much clearer. So not extra stuff that we often like to add when talking. It could be organizational, which means let's think about a diving center. When you have the owner of the diving center, you got someone of the staff that had been there for quite a few years, and the new dive master that is working his or her way up to the ladder and getting experience. So what are the chances, honestly, in most situations, that if the owner makes a mistake, this new dive master is going to point it out, like, hey, you did it wrong, or I think it would be better to do it this way. It's it is great when this happens, because it means that there is what we call a psychological safety in the group, so it feels free to speak up. But that's not always happening, and we know this is the most common case, to be honest, because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to be. They sometimes worry about being wrong, and so coming out as dumb. Or there may be cultural barrier. So if we think about some East cultures where there is a huge respect for hierarchy, and so again this situation of someone at let's call it a lower level speaking to someone at a higher level in the hierarchy is really hard to happen. It usually doesn't, and in this way the message may get through incomplete or may not get through at all. Even talking again about organizational, just think about a company where there is an original message from the director, and as long as it's going down the ladder, this is being filtered, because there's no reason for the lower levels to know every details about it. But which means that who is at the end of receiving that message won't have all the data that may be necessary to then take good decisions. And we could also have personal barriers. I don't know about you, but when I started working in the diving center, they always told me to separate couples most of the times. So if we were doing try dives or some training and we had father and son or father and daughter or girlfriend and boyfriend, we were often separating them, at least at the very beginning, because this way both of them were feeling more free to express their doubts or insecurities. Because sometimes you keep that person in high regards and you don't want to disappoint them. So you're not saying that you haven't understood what they were saying or that you have doubts or again you're insecure. And this again is a huge barrier sometimes. Or they may be linguistic. Like in this case, again, we were saying this message are going through sometimes 3 different languages. And about that, I remember there's a personal story again. The first time I went to USA, I rent a car because I was staying there for 40 days. And I went to the first, I needed to refuel the car. So the first time I went to the station, I went inside to buy some other stuff and asked something to the owner. And the owner basically told me, yes, you can now go outside and put gas in your car. And I look at him and I don't want to put gas in my car. Because for me, in Italy, if we're talking about gas, that's methane gas. I want fuel. I want diesel in that car. And it was, yes, you can go and put gas in the car. And I insisted on the fact that I didn't want to put gas in my car. It was the wrong thing to do. And at that point, he realized what the problem was, started to laugh, and just told me, yes, you can put gasoline in your car. And I felt really dumb, to be honest, because simply in this case, the fact of using a short word or sometimes a word that is coming from a jargon caused me to understand a completely different things. And therefore the misunderstanding between the two of us. But in the end, I got it. I never did that mistake again. I now know that don't mean gas with gas, but just gasoline. And the car also became my little garage for the whole trip to fix my rebreathers and all the other stuff. But we don't only have barriers, we also have enablers. So things that helps us to communicate more effectively. And in this case, they are much more linked to our personal level, I would say. So we could talk about trust and respect, for example. Why should I be listening to someone that I do not trust or I do not respect? There is no way that what this person is saying is resonating with me. I'm hearing it, but I'm not listening to it. So the communication, again, is not happening. And then again, we need empathy most of the time when we are talking with other people. And by empathy, I mean, if we think about a diving class where a student is not succeeding, is having difficulties in doing some skills, one way of acting is going to the student and say, listen, if you don't make it right, if you don't do well the next day, I cannot make you pass the class. I cannot give you the license. So just get it together and focus more and do something. Or another way could be, listen, I today didn't rent really well. We all know that. Is there something that is bothering you? Something is not going well? And maybe at that point, the student will be free to express some doubts that he didn't express at the very beginning of the training. Maybe his life is really hard at that moment because of work or personal issues, or maybe he didn't understood what you were explaining to him at the beginning of the exercise. So sometimes just approaching the matter with a different level of empathy is helping a lot. And at the same time, honesty and openness. If I was trying to express something that I do not believe in now, how am I supposed to think that you're listening to me? You would get it that it's not what I'm thinking for real. If I'm saying one thing like, today is a really good day, but with my body language, I'm saying a totally another message. So yeah, today is really good day. You're giving much more importance to the body language because it's more honest than our way of speaking most of the time. And then we need clarity. Clarity means, of course, do not add all the extra beats that we love adding to communication. I do love it as well, but try to be concise when the message needs to get through, and it's really, really important. Just think about a cave diving team. You need to communicate. The messages are super important, and they needs to be as cut to the bone as possible because there must be no misunderstanding in this situation. And then one of the most important thing that I found out when I was looking around for information, delving more into the subject, is actually the practice of active listening. And what does this mean? Active listening means that we're not just hearing what the other person is saying. So we want to ask for deeper questions. We want to give these people our full attention, and we want to avoid interrupting them. It may be whatever something that is coming up to our mind just at that moment. Just hold it back. Let them finish. Let them finish to talk before you speak up. Take nonverbal cues, as you were saying. Just read body language because it can say a lot, especially for dive masters, instructors, teachers in general. You could get if the student is not in a comfort situation or has doubt but is not daring to admit them at the very beginning. Practice silence. Sometimes we get this urge to speak up, to reply, that we don't even let people finish to talk. And instead, if we just keep silent for a moment, they may add other things to what they were saying that are important to the subject we are discussing about. Do not be distracted. Like, do not be distracted by the dog while doing a debriefing just because the dog wants to eat what you have in your plate. Or look around because there is a bird passing by or a friend that you know passing by. Give your full attention to what you're doing and communicating in that moment. And withhold judgment. You want to say something, you really, really want to say what you're thinking, but just wait a second before coming up with a definitive judgment, because you may change your mind as long as you're speaking. And again, just use the full attention, even with your body language, because there is something that I've just seen the other day during a presentation that was an amazing example to express what interruption, distractions could happen nowadays, because we always have these around. We always have our mobile phone with us. And during this presentation, Simon Sinek did a wonderful example. He asked for a mobile phone from the audience and told them, what if I was doing this whole speech with the mobile phone in my hand? I'm not using it. I'm not typing on it, just holding it. What the message that you would receive is that there is something more important than you during my time. So I'm giving more importance to this object than you. And this is actually a really, really good example. Just leave it outside, leave it out. We're now communicating every day, every time through messages, emails, app, WhatsApp, WeChat, Discord. We get so many that we cannot even keep track of it. Just cut it out. Just focus on who you're talking to, give them their attention, and leave all the rest for another time. And with active listening, what I meant is that at the very beginning, we get this urge to speak up, to say, to express our thought, and makes a lot of stuff about us. So a person is telling us about a problem that they had, and we are like, oh, this happened to me, and I did this and this and this and this. Well, you could at some point just listen before speaking. And if you keep practicing this active listening, you will move through different steps. So you will go from listening to speak to listening to understand what the other person is saying. And at that point, to the next step, which is the most important one, which is listen to learn. And it's actually really easy to say that. It's not that easy to practice, because instinctively we want to express our thought. We want to say what we're thinking. So how to check that our communication is actually happening? There is a really good really good trick that we can use, which is what is so-called the two ways communication. So in this image, you could see that there are some black areas and some blue areas. The black ones are one way of this communication, and the blue ones are the way back, the second way of where this communication is getting through. And what does it mean is that when you have a sender, someone that is want to share a message, transmit an information with someone, in this case, it is thinking about a tree, and so he delivered this message through the word tree. And the message is getting through all the barriers that we have been talking about before and all the enablers, and getting through the receiver to the receiver. And the receiver is receiving this message. But in this case, with just the word tree, the receiver may think about an apple tree instead of a pine tree at the very beginning. So if we just cut the communication here, the message has gone through, but it's wrong. Instead, if we want to close the loop in this case and go back to these people, to the sender, saying, again, apple tree. So this is what I perceived from your communication. The sender, who is now the receiver, can decode the message and say, wait, no, this is not what I meant. I didn't mean apple tree, I meant pine tree. And closing this communication allows us to be sure that the message is correctly received. In diving, we could think about exchanging the pressure of our tanks while underwater. So reading the SPGs, how often it happens that someone is reading it the wrong way, or the other person is not getting it correctly. And so it may happen that a dive master hands up the dive much before the necessary because they thought that the person was low on air when they were not, or the other way around. They just keep going because they think that this person still have a lot of air in their tanks. And again, this is not the situation. So what we actually do when exchanging this message is not only using our hands to express what's the remaining gas in the tank, but also showing the SPG, and the other person is repeating what we had said. So this way we are sure that both of us got the message correctly. And these two-ways communication models allows us to catch up a lot of errors and mistakes that are happening. So again, communication, as we find out, is not that simple. Communication, transmission of message happens a lot of the times, always, every day, but effective communication is not. And we could see even just on social media, how many arguments are going on, how many discussions are happening because someone reads the message you have written with another tone, in another way, and you didn't intend it. You didn't mean that. You meant something different. But they perceive it in a different way because maybe they were angry at that point, or they were just tired, whatever. They reply in another way and the discussion starts. And I just had an exchange of messages this morning with Garrett. We were asking about some information for this talk, and we had this exact same problem. So I replied to something that was not what he was actually asking for because I read his message in another way. So it happens every day, to be honest. What I would suggest to sum it up in the conclusion of this is to start to learn to listen actively. Work on that. Work on keeping your mouth shut, just your ears open, and really, really listen to the person in front of you. And be curious. I had absolutely no idea of a lot of these things when I started to delve into the human factors fields. And while being curious, I just started to look around and reading and watching videos, listening to podcasts, and I realized of how much I actually didn't know, and I still don't know now. This is just me scratching the surface of the topic. And stay humble, because we all consider ourselves often great communicators or great listeners, and we may find out that it's not always the case. So again, I do really think that every act of communication is a miracle of translation. And I do hope you think the same and agree on this point of view. If not, just let me know why, and we can discuss about it. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great job, Beatrice. We are open for questions. Ange, it's all yours.
Hi, thanks, Brian. I have a question. Sorry, we'll go over to Chris. He's got a question for us. Chris, would you like to join us?
Chris, that was a really interesting presentation.
Hi, Chris.
I wondered if you had an example of where the active listening worked really well, where you picked up something that maybe wouldn't have come up if you hadn't sort of been engaged with that and you'd just been on that sort of listening to speak situation.
Yeah, I have to say that this usually happens during classes. So when we, especially during the debriefing time, when you let students talk and maybe they've done something again that was not perfect, was not correct during the skills, and they just explain you why. Usually they try to justify their mistakes. But if you let them talk instead, and just ask them what do they think about what they did and why they did it that way, they will give you a lot of answer that you were not expecting. And again, you may find out that they did not understood everything that you explained at the very beginning correctly. Yeah. So I would say that's a really good situation where it works. And another one for me in particular is while doing some underwater maintenance or work, because it's something that where I have less experience than teaching than training. So at the very beginning, I was just listening, but I was so focused on what I had to do that I was hearing the message, but not understanding it correctly. I was missing some stuff. So I had to dive again sometimes during some surveys to check a few things that I didn't check during the first dive. And that cost me time and effort, and we all know where this goes. And that was just because I didn't pay, let's say, enough attention at the very beginning.
Brilliant, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for your question, Chris. Beatrice, you're talking about briefing for a diving class. You can't actually ask every student to repeat everything that they've said or saying so. So do you have any suggestions for checking understanding?
Yeah, actually, as I was saying, we cannot pretend. If we got a group of 4 students, we cannot pretend that each one of them is going to repeat the whole briefing in every details. But what we can do is letting them know that at the end of the briefing, someone is going to repeat it, and ask them to repeat it with their own words. So do not repeat exactly what I've said, which just means that you had been hearing it, but explain it to me. And this way, this is something where you can check. And if doubts arise, it will also usually encourage the other students to speak up, because if someone has a doubt, then the other feels much safer saying that they have doubts too.
Yeah.
So that would be something that I would do.
I understand where you're coming from there. There will be situations though where there might be an impasse. How would you suggest getting through an impasse with a conversation, with communication?
Impasse actually happens a lot of times. If I think about my personal experience, one of the diver I dived the most with is actually one of those I struggle a lot communicating with, which is strange.
One of those.
It still happens. Yeah, we all have those people we just get into dive with the first time, and communication is amazing. You just need to look at each other's eyes, and everything is fine.
Yes.
Still, there are people we had been diving with for years, and we are struggling. And there is one of these situations. So we sometimes reach this sort of impasse where I'm trying to say something, the other person is trying to say something, and there is no way to reach a common ground. So in this situation, what I started doing is basically taking a huge step back. So I say, okay, just erase everything, like with math problems when I was a kid in school. So you do your math exercise and it's not working, and you try to look for the mistake, you can find it. If you just erase it completely and do it from the very beginning, maybe it's working sometimes. So what I do is taking this huge step back and start from the very beginning, and usually practice this exercise, which is let the other person speak for 30, 40 seconds to express their point of view. Then before replying, before telling what you think, express what you got from what they were saying. So you summarize what they were saying and check that this is the correct thing. And then you speak for another 30, 40 seconds, and this go on. And it usually helps. So that is something that I would suggest.
Okay. Do you have any suggested reading materials? Is there anything out there that people who are in our conference today who would like to follow up on communication and communication styles? Do you have any selected reading materials that we could pursue?
I would say, at least for me, what is working, there are tons of podcasts and videos on YouTube about the subject, which are, I think, easier to approach because they give you something that is not like a 300 pages book, but they are just highlights on the topic. So you get some hints on what you're much more interested into. And there is this series of podcasts from these guys called Two Communication Guys, I think, and it gets more than 100 episodes. So there's really stuff for everyone. And again, a lot of videos on YouTube, or we could also talk about some really known books like Leadership is Language is one of them, from David Marquette. Or we could also have Talk Like TED from Gallo, Just Listen from Mark Goldstone. There are tons of reading, and I'll be sure to mention some of them in the proceedings so that people can just grab them.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Beatrice. Do we have any other questions? Laura. Hi.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Beatrice. That was a really excellent talk. Thank you. It's really useful. It had me reflecting a lot on instruction. And I've not tell the whole story, but I had a moment of where we had that, something happened on a dive, very minor. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why did they do that? And almost ready to say, oh, you should have done it this way. But like held back on that to be not just, oh, tell me why you did that, but actually genuinely like, okay, well, tell me a bit about what made you decide that. And then it was about turning the dive, and I didn't think they needed to turn the dive. And they said, well, I just asked somebody their air, and they said it was this much, and we decided to turn it this time. And I was like, oh, great, that's really good thinking. It meant I had the opportunity to praise that thinking, and then we had an open discussion about why we might decide to do things differently, etc. And I was just thinking about how, just how exciting that is, and how much it enriches your instruction and your kind of ability to teach. So that made me think of like, well, once you see it, you see it. So my kind of question was, well, how do we help other people? How do we kind of help encourage people to see just how valuable this is?
I think what you've just said is absolutely true. We always say that students learn from us, but we learn from students as well. And again, every situation could teach you something, because you got your own way of thinking about stuff and taking decision. But as soon as you give someone else the chance to speak up, they may give you a different point of view that may change your future decision. So what I would suggest in this case is, if the person is not convinced, you may try to ask them their opinion at that kind of situation, or trying to find out a situation where they took a different decision from someone else and making them explaining that. So like making them understand that there are different ways of seeing stuff, and both reasons can be valid. So you can have good reason to take a certain decision, but you need to link it to the personal stuff most of the time. I mean, I think that for some not student, just people, linking it to personal experience is better. For some others, there is like this ego going on. So if you just keep the talking more general, it would help them. And if it's the case, in that case, I use myself as an example. So I make an example where I took a different decision from the leader or someone else and explaining why, or I would have taken a different decision and explain why. So I put myself in the how can I say, in the position where I'm the one who is vulnerable in this case. And I think that should help.
Thanks very much.
Answered your questions.
Thanks very much, Laura, for your question. And thank you, Beatrice, for spending the time with us today, this evening, the morning, wherever we are in the world.
Midday for us.
If anyone would like to carry on the conversation with Beatrice or have any other further questions, you can head over to the lobby where there are a couple of tables called Meet the Last Speaker. And Beatrice will be over in Hall 2 for the last speaker, where you can carry on some conversations regarding her topic. But thank you very much, Beatrice. Coming up next. Thank you. Sorry about that. Coming up next, we have Chris Tribble, and he will be presenting a topic on application of human factors as an average diver. I'm in that category, I think. If you'd like to, we'll be back here at the top of the hour, and if you'd like to come and join us back then, we'll be looking forward to seeing you.